The irony is now, 10 years later, I look at those young people who got involved with me the first time. They're now in their late 20s and they're saying, I can't afford a home. Like, I thought you were supposed to be fixing this, and instead the world has gone in the wrong direction.
Justin Trudeau recently sat down with his buddy Dr. Paul Kershaw at Generation Squeeze. You remember that guy, right? He's the one with the organization classified as a charity who is recommending that the government tax your primary residence. Yeah, that guy.
Let's take a look.
I'm excited to welcome you all to our town hall today with the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. And we're gathering here today on the unceded territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam people. Advancing reconciliation is really important at Generation Squeeze, and indeed in our life, our focus on generational fairness is really central to the project of trying to implement in Canadian society the seventh generation principle. The wisdom and practice of governments for many Indigenous nations in Turtle Island to think about decisions today, not only for the present, but also what will it mean as far out as 7 generations from now. That's hard to do in Canadian politics when our electoral cycles are 4 to 5 years. And so our efforts try and enshrine generational fairness more into the machinery of government as a way to try and bring that Indigenous principle into the structures of our governance for the benefit of all.
I hate that term, generational fairness.
I hate a lot of the terms.
It drives me nuts. It really does. You know, especially when they refer to things like the capital gains tax as generational fairness. How is it fair to work your entire life? Maybe you were fortunate enough to purchase a second property, or maybe you inherited a cottage, or who knows. And then you've worked your entire life and you're using this second property as your nest egg and you're just getting towards retirement, and then the government pulls the rug out from under you and says, if you sell that, 66.7% of the capital gains belong to us. How is that fair?
Yeah, and the answer is that it's not. But the other interesting thing is even Justin Trudeau can't keep eye contact with this guy. Like, just keep that in mind. If Justin Trudeau can't keep eye contact with this guy, and this is a safe room for Justin Trudeau to be.
Yeah, it is, because no doubt they've had many conversations before.
Yeah, because, you know, notice he's not coming on our podcast, so.
Trudeau wouldn't dare to come on this podcast.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't.
We're here to talk about fairness for every generation. That's the title of Budget 2024. It's also the call to action that Generation Squeeze has been making for over a decade since our inception. And so we think this budget is absolutely historic. Never before has a government acknowledged that the middle class right now is being really distorted by the way that one's age interacts with the housing system, how it shapes our experience in the housing system, so that income now matters less than it did in the past, and secure housing and home equity matters so much more, privileging people like me who've been in the housing market for some decades, especially in this region in Metro Vancouver.
Did you see that black and white photo of Freeland and Trudeau? That gave me the heebie-jeebies. It looked evil.
I was in the process of throwing up in my mouth just listening to this guy, because he's talking about your age, and it shapes your experience with the house. Like, shut up.
You know what I just find so rich is that the government was the one who screwed up our housing situation. And they're like, oh no, it's not fair for millennials and younger. It's the boomers' fault.
As many of you took your seats today, you would have seen scrolling on what is all too tiny a screen, a range of thank yous from the many, many people in our alliance, the over 40,000 folks who are part of Gen Squeeze, and many sent thank you notes to the Government of Canada for making the promise to restore fairness for every generation. And I wanted to highlight what's happening with the federal budget is being noticed around the world. The UK with the Intergenerational Foundation, they have described Canada's 2024 budget as a, quote, massive win for the principle of intergenerational fairness. In the US, the Berkeley Institute for Young Americans has identified it as historic. And both of those organizations are calling on governments around the world to take note of the leadership on generational fairness that is happening right now here in Canada.
Are you trying to tell me that left-wing academia is praising a left-wing budget?
I would have never seen that coming.
No. No. Wow. Okay. So did Trudeau? Well, this Trudeau paid this guy what, $250,000? Funny, $250,000. You'll see that in another video of ours. But this is just like stroking Trudeau's ego. This whole thing makes you wonder if this was set up.
Oh, of course it was set up. I mean, he's a politician. Trudeau's a politician. He's not going to go on some podcast unless he knows exactly what to expect. Like we said, that's why he's never going to show up on here. It's because he wants to look good, right, to the voters. So he's going to go into a controlled situation where he knows what to expect.
With that, Prime Minister, I wanted to say congratulations. Thank you for that budget. Thank you for that progress. And can I invite you to greet the audience?
Well, listen, I want to thank all of you. You are here because Paul has immense admiration for you, for the work you do. I know it's a great group of people where we agree on all sorts of things and look forward to digging into the places where we can all learn from each other. It's interesting because you talked about the Indigenous principle of 7 generations as a way of building in a reflection that is more long-term. When I got into politics, it was very much from having been a teacher and a youth advocate and activist for years before I got into politics. And that frame was something I didn't go explicitly from the Indigenous side, although I knew that 7-generation principle. Like, I realized that politics needed to bring in young people in a way that it hadn't before. Not just because, well, young people are often disconnected from politics, not because they're apathetic, but because they care so much. They see a more aggressive type of activism as being more impactful, a better use of their time than the kind of incrementalism that politics usually and that governance usually brings. But the biggest reason that I used to lean on young people so much is because young people are naturally both more comfortable with change and more naturally long-term thinkers. When adults reach a certain point in their life, they think of the long term as a linear extension of whatever moment they're in right now. If you set aside a certain percentage of your income, if you pay off the mortgage in a while, if you go through your career path in a certain way, that you can predict what your retirement's going to look like. Young people are leaping from living at home to high school to university to living out on their own to starting a family. Everything is such deeply transformational that it's easier to draw on young people for a longer term thinking than the 4-year political cycle usually allows to. So for me, leaning on young people and bringing them in 2015 was a hugely important part of what shaped my entry into politics. And the irony is now, 10 years later, I look at those young people who got involved with me the first time. They're now in their late 20s and they're saying, I can't afford a home. Like, I thought you were supposed to be fixing this, and instead the world has gone in the wrong direction. And you can say, look, it would have been way worse had we not made the investments we did. But that's really the thing that fed into me to the need in this budget to say, okay, there's something fundamentally shifted in our economy that young people don't have the kinds of opportunities they had before, and that's what we're trying to go at, and that's where you and folks like you have been so incredibly helpful in our thinking.
The shift in the economy was this liberal government.
Okay, so
he said the quiet part out loud.
What he also said was, we need to rely on young people. They're better long-term thinkers. So that's what I relied on in 2015. And I'm going to paraphrase now. And look at the mess that we're in now.
Right.
Because I relied on young people to feed my agenda.
Well, young people traditionally are more left-leaning and they become more conservative as they become older. And to me, it's like, look at what we promised these young people. And then over the past 9 years, we've completely destroyed the country. So none of them get what was promised.
Well, and he even said, well, think of how bad it would have been if we didn't make those investments. You didn't invest anything.
What investments?
You invested nothing in housing. You had this quote unquote housing accelerator of $4 billion that you didn't touch until the fall of 2023.
Well, and then look, they put in the Century Initiative, and I mean, young people are fighting for entry-level jobs with like millions of newcomers. They're fighting for the same jobs. They're fighting for the same homes. Of course, young people are not doing well right now.
Yeah, and that's why you lost all of them, Trudeau. And the new young people coming in, they are seeing what, the state that you've put the country in, and they're saying, hell no, I am not voting for that guy. I'm not listening to that guy. And they're turning to the Conservatives because the Conservatives actually want to put money back in your pocket. Justin wants to take it away. And this is the whole thing. It goes around the principle of wealth redistribution.
Sounds like communism to me.
That's a fancy word for wealth redistribution. So, the government wants you to pay more and more and more and more and more taxes, and then take more and more choices away from you with how you spend that money. It's like they pat you on the head and say, oh, you don't know how to spend that money properly. We will spend it for you.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they want to implement a school lunch program because children are going to school hungry. And that is a tragedy. Like, children should not be going to school hungry. But it's the government's fault those kids are going to school hungry. So instead of not taxing the parents and permitting the parents to buy nutritious food for the children with the money that they earn, instead of handing that money to the government's like, well, clearly you can't feed your kids, so we'll do it for you. It makes no sense.
But it's funny that he admitted it. Like Tanya said, he admitted that he's the one who screwed up the country. Well, I guess at least he's admitting something.
Well, I like your focus on younger folks already being mindful of the challenges and also the longer term thinkers. And so I want to take that as a starting point and start our conversation reflecting on a video that you put out when you announced that the budget was going to focus on fairness for every generation. You were sitting in front of your office in an outfit much like today's. And the first couple of minutes of that video outlined for people a range of challenges that young folks were facing. But you were very intentional towards the end of the video, where you started to acknowledge older people. And you said to Gen Xers like me, full disclosure, that's like me too, and those who came before. And you said, younger folks are counting on us, and that we feel it in our bones. We can't let them down. I loved that moment. I love that moment because I'm motivated by intergenerational solidarity. And if we actually are going to live up to that principle, we need young and old alike to come together. And I like that moment also because polling for some time now has showcased that a younger demographic worries that we don't necessarily have that solidarity as much. And indeed, Leger came out with polling just yesterday that said, identified over half of 18 to 29-year-olds that they can be convinced by a pollster to say previous generations are rigging the system for their benefit and making it harder for my generation. Now, clearly, none of us want younger folks feeling that way. So I wonder, taking your video, the end of your video as a starting point, what do we need to say to Gen X, to boomers, and those who came from, so that we don't let younger folks down?
Well, I think the first piece of it is, I think of all the conversations I've had with older generations of folks who are deeply committed to the environment, right? Even though, what happens beyond 10, 20 years from now will have zero impact on them. They know how important it is, whether it's the raging grannies, whether it's, these really, really thoughtful folks who are thinking about legacy, thinking about the things that they were able to grow up with that they took for granted and that their grandkids may not see. So on the environment, I see it all the time. On On childcare, I see it all the time. Grandparents who come up to say, "Oh my God, $10 a day childcare, making a huge difference in the 7 jurisdictions across the country where it's landed. Just the cut in half made a huge difference." Like there are lots of older generations of folks who are thinking about it.
Maybe I'm just clueless, but why would grandparents be saying, "Oh my God, this is great," in terms of $10 a day childcare?
I think traditionally that grandparents used to often, not all the time, but they would often babysit their grandchildren. I know when my aunt was going back to school, my grandmother would watch my cousins for her while my uncle was at work. So I think traditionally, you know, it's been the broader family that would help raise the children rather than hand them over to a complete stranger at a daycare.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm obviously not a grandparent, neither is Tanya. So, you know, drop a comment what your thoughts are on that. Is $10 a day childcare a relief for you as a grandparent that doesn't, you know, you don't have little children anymore? Or is this just, again, more crap by Justin Trudeau, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards. And,
you know, the thing that I would tell millennials and well, I am a millennial, but that I would tell the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha even, is to vote conservative, because the conservatives didn't get us into this mess.
No, and the conservatives are always the one that gets us out of these fiscally ridiculous situations that far left ideologies leave us in, aka Trudeau the senior and now Trudeau Jr.
And the budget will balance, and the budget will balance, and the budget will balance itself. A place where I think there's still work, because it doesn't feel intuitively like there's a solution, is around housing. Like you talk to an older generation of folks, they say, "Oh no, I remember I had to scrimp and save for years before we could set a down payment on a home. It was really hard. It was a big expense. Housing's always hard. You know, it's not like, grandparents, loaf of bread used to cost me a nickel," or whatever it is. It's this idea that, oh no, housing was always the big expense, and it was always hard to get into housing. So they see young people saying, "Oh, it's hard to get into housing." I'm like, yeah, no, we lived that. And to explain to them, no, you didn't. There is something foundationally different in this generation, that young people can have great jobs and a solid side hustle and shifted expectations, and they still can't find a place to actually start on that path towards home equity or home ownership. Like that shift is different. And part of it's the underinvestment in housing construction over decades. But there's other things happening, and getting seniors to understand that there is something different, I think is a bit of a challenge that we're still working on.
You hear that, seniors? You need to be re-educated.
And I love how he doesn't mention that, again, it's a supply versus demand issue. And when the Liberals are bringing in like 500,000 plus people a year into the country and there's no homes for them, of course there's going to be supply issues with housing.
Right, but he's turned this into a "I'm on your side, young people," and it's an interesting narrative that he's taking here, because he seems to be casting away seniors to the wind in his quest to balance the polls here.
Yeah, but Trudeau always does that. He always goes after one group to the detriment of another, hoping that other group isn't going to be listening to this particular thing. Like, how many seniors do you think are going to be listening to a podcast on YouTube?
Well,
I mean, the whole channel has less subscribers than like...
Yeah, this channel only has around 400 subscribers.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of seniors that listen to our podcast, I can tell you that. So, and we love you for it. But so this is Justin Trudeau, and he's still crapping on you.
Well, that's a perfect segue for me, because I'd love to push the conversation a bit deeper on that issue. Not that long ago, you had a really fascinating interview with a Gen Z reporter running a podcast for the Globe. And it's been called City Space. Highly recommend it, folks. And it was a really clever reporter. She effectively said, "Prime Minister, for my generation, it would be so helpful if housing prices fell. But clearly for homeowners right now, that's not what they're going to think is in their interest. And so she asked, like, how do you manage that tension? And if you'll permit me, I'll paraphrase. It was an important moment because I was impressed you didn't dodge the question. You instantly, as any good politician would do in a country where the majority of voters are homeowners, said, we need to have housing retain its value because that's how we protect the nest eggs of those who are older. But in the very same breath, you didn't even take a breath in between, you acknowledge that for those who are renting, those who are going to locked out of homeownership, that the resulting wealth inequalities, that's not always fair. And I liked that interview because I think it showcases how big an ask that Gen X, boomers, and those who came before are making of a younger demographic. Yeah. Effectively, the political compromise for some time now has been, younger folks, can you tolerate higher rents, longer periods of time of putting off that dream of homeownership if it can come to fruition at all in some of our cities? Can you sacrifice in those ways, in no small part to protect the home equity of those who came before? And so how do we, as Gen Xers and those old, how do we talk to an older demographic and say, wow, let us recognize how much we're asking for younger folks? And are there ways for us to reciprocate more, including in the world of politics, to help deliver more of the policy adaptations that can help make hard work pay off for younger folks the way that it did some decades ago?
Okay, my face was just completely scrunched up this entire point. What the hell? All right, so this guy is saying that, yeah, so it's all of the homeowners. It's their fault. They're the ones that are asking these young people, well, we need you to sacrifice for the sake of our home equity. Okay, A, stop with this victim mentality crap. And B, it's not the homeowners that are the problem. It's the governments that have been managing policy for the last 50 years, and especially the last 9 years.
Well, Canada has one of the worst, if not the worst, housing bubbles in the entire world. And eventually it's going to pop. And there's going to be a lot of economic damage when that happens. Trudeau is obviously hoping it doesn't happen under him, or else it'll make him look even worse. But he's allowed it to balloon even bigger because, again, they're bringing more people into Canada than Canada can currently support right now. We don't have homes for everybody that's being brought in. I mean, last year alone, we had over 500,000 people brought into the country, and that's the size of the city of Hamilton. Can you imagine every year, year after year, a new city of Hamilton somewhere in this country? Like, that's a lot of people who need homes and services.
Well, and here's the thing, and this is the reality, and it's not going to be sugar-coated. So Trudeau was, frankly, encouraging everybody to go out and buy a home in 2020. The interest rates are low. No problem. So all of these people went nuts buying homes, and they were bidding and overbidding and overbidding. You know, there was one story where one of our friends was trying to buy a home during this period of time, and it was strange because there was this group of realtors outside of the home, and each one would go in and then put their offer down, and then they would come back out, and just every single one of them, you know, was coming out and be like, no, wasn't enough. And I think and this wasn't like some rich person's home. It was just, you know,
just a regular house.
Regular home, and someone had overbid by $180,000. So you have this scenario where all of that is happening, and these people then take out these mortgages at these low rates, but they're not going to be able to afford what is coming. So that was mostly between 2020 and 2022. But a lot of it happened in 2020. Well, all of those mortgages are going to be maturing next year.
Yeah, something like 30% of them are going to be maturing between now and 2025.
Before the election. So Trudeau no doubt is, his team, if they're smart, they're watching this and they're checking in with the financial institutions of, what the default rates are doing. And if they're starting to really go up, then it's not going to be in Trudeau's interest to have the election after all of this is in full swing. And the big story is going to be Pierre Poilievre was right, because he's been saying this for the last 2 years, that a mortgage crisis is coming. And it's as a result of Trudeau dumping hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy and drastically aggravating inflation. So this is real. And this is what's up. This has nothing to do with the homeowners at all. You know what you can do for young people? Start going after the universities and asking why they're raising tuition like 100%. Ask that. So, that's just one thing that you can do for young people. But it comes down to wages, and it primarily comes down to inflation. And biggest people that are causing inflation and have control over it is the federal government. So I don't buy this. Oh, well, it's just all the older generation's fault. No, it's not.
It's the government's fault.
One of the stats that fascinated me is, there are countries in which home ownership levels are much lower, where people don't put all their retirement eggs into the home equity basket, right? I mean, like the idea that you would have, you'd buy a home, you'd pay off the mortgage, and then you'd watch the value of it skyrocket, and that would be your pension.
That's my story, by the way.
Well, bully for you. I now live in, yeah.
No, you can have me on the hot seat.
I know, this is it. And we've taken those last, 10, 20 years of massive increase in value of homes as sort of a new normal, as, okay, this is the way the system works, and, it's tough, but it means that we're going to have value in our homes that we can therefore retire on. And I tend to think that if we were a country that did a better job in helping people plan for retirement, in better pensions, so there wouldn't be that massive gap in terms of people who rent throughout their lives. Like, there are lots of cities around the world where people just accept that they're going to rent their entire lives, but they're not feeling they're going to be impoverished in retirement. Well, other people who rent in Canada feel like they have a big piece of a nest egg that's simply not there because they've been renters all their lives. There's a challenge there that I think there are elements of policy solutions, but the big thing is we just have to slow down on the speculation, right? I mean, like housing prices and value should increase over a lifetime, but you shouldn't be able to flip a home, 8 years later and have it double the price, right? I mean, there's something unsustainable, and it moves housing into an investment vehicle rather than a vehicle for supporting a family and building a community around it. And as soon as it's an investment vehicle, you have people who have money using it as a way of generating more, as opposed to saying, okay, everyone should have an opportunity to do this.
Okay, so he's saying we need to put more money into pensions. No.
Well, the Harper government tried to put more money into pensions by delaying retirement by 2 years. Therefore, you would not be taking money out those 2 years, but you would also be paying into the system for an additional 2 years. And the Liberals got rid of it.
And it's funny because in 2021, they, tried to basically seek, avenues to keep the senior generation working. Except they, the only caveat is they didn't want to, delay retirement by 2 years. So they wanted to keep incentivizing, seniors to work to keep them in the workforce, which is, as we covered in our previous video, part of the Century Initiative. So, but the thing is that, he says, well, we need to dump more money into pensions, and that will incentivize people away from keeping their wealth in their house. Well, here's the problem, Trudeau. Why do you think people are doing that? It's because you're forcing them to do that.
Well, it sounds to me what Trudeau is saying is that he doesn't want people to own homes. He wants them to rent homes and wants the government to be responsible for their pensions instead of people building up equity privately in their owned home.
Well, I guarantee if the Liberal government had its own way, then, it would be responsible for all housing in Canada, because then you would be completely reliant on the government on where you lived. And that way the government would take care of everything. The government would take care of your groceries, take care of your schools, and take care of everything. And guess what? You wouldn't have a choice as to what you ate and where you slept and what you did and all of this. It's, that wonderful dictatorship that Trudeau is so fond of. But he doesn't seem to understand that what's causing the housing problem primarily is your Century Initiative immigration policy. That is number one, and everyone is saying that.
And if you guys haven't seen our video on the Century Initiative, we'll put a link in the description as well as on the end screen. Go check it out. It explains a lot of this.
Yeah, it would be funny if it wasn't actually happening, but it's humorous to see Justin Trudeau just deflect and gaslight, and this guy is just helping him do it. And you have all these young people behind him just nodding their head. That was probably their instruction, before coming in. Whenever Justin speaks, nod your head like Chrystia Freeland. So, but this is the thing. So it's hard to listen to, but this is important because this is a preview of what we're going to be hearing from Justin Trudeau over the next 6 months or so. And when he sees that that's not going to work, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because as we approach 2025, we approach what will most likely be, it's hard to imagine, the worst period of Justin Trudeau's prime ministerial career, because all of these people are going to be losing their homes. You're going to have a mortgage disaster, and I don't think the NDP are going to be able to stand anywhere near him at that point. They are going to have to vote non-confidence after Jagmeet gets his pension.
Of course.
But so anyway, so this was part one of the interview, and we'll leave it there. We're gonna watch the rest of the interview and see if we can stomach any more of that. And if there's anything juicy, you'll be sure to see it on Northern Perspective.